Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. It is October 16th, 2024. It is Wednesday, called Hump Day, and we're continuing on our journey of the New World Order and mind control. So we left off at the Adam Weishaupt information. He was a founder of the Bavarian Illuminati in 1776. And he has some issues with the religious orders, like the Vatican. So we get into the part where we're talking about taking the psyche out of psychology. So it states here that among the basic studies consulted by Rockefeller funded scientists and other interested groups, what the scientists and other interested group were doing in social control at the beginning of the first century, or excuse me, this century, were those of the official Prussian state psychologist, Wilhelm Maximilian Wundt. He was a professor of psychology at the University of Heidelberg. It's fascinating that once, and I say once, but it's probably said another way, Wendts, Wundt's grandfather is mentioned in the Illuminati Provincial Report from Eureka, and this was in September of 1782. He was a member known as Raphael. They like to pick these religious names, archangel names, religious themes. So his grandfather was named Raphael in the order, and during the period before Wundt's ascendancy into the field, psychology was considered to be simply enough, the study of the soul or a mind psyche. So, again, this is where I say that spirituality is science, science is spirituality. So even the orders understood that everything is spiritual or energetic. Energetic is just another word for spiritual energy. So I'll repeat this part again. During the period of Wundt's ascendancy in the field, psychology was considered to be simply enough the study of the soul or the mind psyche. Wundt was to change all that, defining and propagandizing for the materialistic viewpoint that would disinform the work of successors like Pavlov, Skinner, and Watson. Wundt took a chair in philosophy at the University of Leipzig in 1875, establishing the world's first psychological laboratory and creating the psychological journal Philosophical Studies. He redefined psychology for this century. Wundt stated that with characteristic modesty, quote unquote, the work which I here present to the public is an attempt to mark out a new domain in science. Wundt was to remain at the University of Leipzig until his death in 1920. His doctrine might be categorized as a science meets the Hegelian Sturm und Drang. One of the primary underpinnings of the New World Order is that its strategy for world conquest originates in the philosophy of Hegel. Hegel was a professor of philosophy at the University of Berlin, and his works formed the basis for the both Marxist dialectical materialism and fascist statism. So this is where we get into problem, reaction, solution. Hegel stated that the belief was that man is subordinate to the state and only finds fulfillment in obedience to the dictates of the state. As he said, quote, the state is the absolute reality, and the individual himself has objective existence, truth and morality only in his capacity as a member of the state. This philosophy can be and has been used for the justification of any number of atrocities that have been committed upon the human race. And this provides an unexamined substratum to the philosophies of many politicians today. If only the omelet of the state is important, what does it matter if we lose a few million eggs, which is humans, in the process of cooking the dish? Hegel was the originator of the theory of the dialectic, which is the idea that conflict determines history. According to Hegel, a force, quote unquote, thesis dictates its own opposing force, the antithesis. Antithesis. These forces in conflict result in the reaction of the third force, which is a synthesis. Again, problem, reaction, solution, right? Out of this synthesis, the process begins again. Marx later revised the theory of the dialectic, insisting that only material events were relevant and that the dialectic was inherent in matter, thus divorcing the idea from metaphysics, at least to his own satisfaction. Excuse me. From the theory of the dialectic comes the realization that creation of conflicts can create determined outcomes or synthesis. Those who promote the New World Order again and again are seen to be using the theory of the Hegelian dialectic to bring it about. They are manipulating events, they are creating conflicts, they're creating wars, and they are destroying the lives of untold millions in the bargain. The New World Order is the desired synthesis of the controlling forces operant in the world today. Naturally, the Hegelian system goes completely against the grain of most people, particularly those in the West. The Western citizens who view the individual as the true sovereign are considered to be wrong. Thus, the real enemies are not America versus the Soviets, or the political left against the political right, but those who would manipulate the yin and yang of history. To return to one, like Marx, he maintained that unless a thing could be scientifically quantified, there was no point in considering it or even including it as a factor in scientific investigation. All psychological studies should be based upon physiology, quote unquote, the body reactions. Wundt essentially redefined psychological studies as studies of the brain and the nervous system, and he redefined man as an animal without a soul. It's unbelievable. Thus legitimizing, at least for his associates and their employers, the treating of man as such. So this is where I believe that most of these philosophers, when they say these things and they write these things, they don't actually believe it. Because if you have no soul or a spirit, then what are you? A soul is conscious, a spirit is conscious. So the fact that they came, I think they're just, I honestly think that they're being dishonest. I think that they follow a particular religion and only put these ideas out for control, kind of like the religions that controlled the ancient times, or like the Vatican. They put out these ideas to control the populations and to dumb them down. So it continues. This, no doubt, was a welcome rationalization for the controllers, who could now happily slaughter whomever they pleased, and without fear of ultimate spiritual retribution or accounting. This is what it's about. It has nothing to do that, a person doesn't have a soul. is just to give the excuse to the ruling class to eliminate large swaths of the population. So one said, it truly appears to be a useless waste of energy to keep returning to such aimless discussions about the nature of the psyche, which were in vogue for a while and practically still are. Instead, rather of applying one's energies where they will produce results. According to researchers, for one, want, will was the direct result of the combination of perceived stimuli, which was not an independent individual intention as psychology and philosophy had, with some notable exceptions. One's rejection of the intangibles of life, such as the soul, the mind, and free will, have influenced psychiatry and psychology up to the present day. To me, it seems like these individuals, they were using these philosophies and ideas and putting it out there as a weapon to see how many people were dumb enough to buy into it. That's just my opinion. So it continues. And now you know why shrinks look so weird and often have nervous tics. They have been taught that they do not have a soul. According to one chronicler of history of psychology, after once theories became popular, naturally Leipzig became the mecca of students who wished to study the new psychology, which is a psychology that was no longer a branch of speculative philosophy and no longer a fragment of the science of physiology, but a novel and daring and exciting attempt to study mental processes by the experimental and quantitative methods common to all science. For the psychology of Leipzig in the 80s and the 90s, the newest thing under the sun, it was the psychology for bold young radicals who believed that the ways of the mind could be measured and treated experimentally, and who possibly thought of themselves in their private reflections as pioneers on the newest frontier of science, pushing its method into reaches of experience that it had never before invaded. At any rate, they threw themselves into their task with industry and zest. They became trained introspectionists, adding introspection to the resources of the physiological laboratories. They attempted to the minute to analyze of sensation and perception. They measured reaction times, following their problems into numerous and widespread ramifications. They investigated verbal reactions, thus extending their researchers into the field of association. They measured the span and the fluctuations of attention and noted some of its more complex features in the complication experiment. And this was a laboratory method patterned after the situation that gave rise to the astronomer's problem of personal equation. In their studies of feeling and emotion, they recorded pulse rates, breathing rates, and fluctuations in muscular strength. And in the same connection, they developed methods of recording systematically and treating statistically the impressions observed by introspection. They also developed the psychological or the psychophysical methods, and in addition made constant use of resources of the physiological laboratory. And throughout all their endeavors, they were dominated by the conception of psychology that should be scientific as opposed to speculative. Always, they attempted to rely on exact observation, experimentation, and measurement. Finally, when they left Leipzig and worked in laboratories of their own, chiefly American and German universities, most of them retained enough of the Leipzig impress to teach a psychology that, whatever the subsequent development of the individual thought, bore traces of the system which was recognized at Leipzig as orthodox. The essence of Wundt's research was that man was a machine, albeit a soft one. One, he also went along with the Hegelian axiom that man was simply a cog in the greater machine of the state. Was it just a coincidence that he and his cohorts, funded by working Prussian military and political establishment, provided the justification for treating humanity as individual pieces of nearly valueless machinery, and this to be tinkered with or destroyed at will? That makes more sense to me. It's a warfare tool against populations. He, along with the other Hegelians, rejected the moral equation in dealing with mankind, thereby putting man in a test tube, and by doing so, opened the door to many of the atrocities that followed in the next century, or in this century, including the horrors of mind control. Another mainstay in the arsenal of the elitist mind control research was the work of Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, who studied physiology at Leipzig in 1884, which was 5 years after Wundt at a laboratory there. In 1906, Pavlov cut holes in dogs. He cut holes in cheeks and inserted tubes to measure salivation. A bell was rung just before food was given to the dogs, and after a period of time, it was observed that the ringing of the bell alone would increase the rate of the dog's salivation. The observation that responses could be so precise and precisely conditioned that was then brainstormed to apply to the mental processes of humans. Pavlov's successors, the shrinks and the social controllers, have continued ringing their bells, selectively keeping us drooling ever since. Shortly after Pavlov's was driving dogs crazy in Russia, John B. Watson at the Johns Hopkins University, the Hegel hotbed for 30 in the United States, was doing the same thing to humans at this time. Watson, the founder of what is known as the behaviorist school of psychology, but is really only research following in the dark shadow of Wundt, believed that the complex forms of behavior could be programmed into humans. He conducted one experiment in which a young boy, little Albert, was given a white rat to play with. After the boy became accustomed to the rat, Watson would beat on the floor with a steel bar every time the rat was brought in. The boy was understandably terrified by such lunatic behavior and eventually reacted with terror every time the rat was given to him, and finally, whenever any small furry animal was around him. Dr. Watson himself drooled over the possibilities of this kind of mechanical conditioning of human beings. Again, it's all about mind control. Terrorize the public, control them. And this is what was stated: give me the baby, and I'll make it climb and use its hands in constructing buildings of stone or wood. I'll make it a thief, a gunman, a dope fiend. The possibilities of shaping in any direction are almost endless. Men are built, not born. Watson later became a highly successful advertising executive, although there are no records available of what happened to little Albert. In the late 1930s, Harvard psychologists Frederick and Skinner, an unapologetic student of Wundt's theories and a member of the U.S. Army intelligence, fine-tuned the art of human control into what he termed operant conditioning, becoming a guru of the generations of mind shapers that followed. His simple and quite familiar, by this time, notion that was the reinforcement of repeated negative stimulus, which was considered punishment, or positive stimulus, which was considered reward, formed the basis for learned behavior. Skinner's earlier experiments produced pigeons that could dance, do figure eights, and play tennis ball or table tennis. His experiments did not stop with pigeons. Skinner's most famous invention aimed at producing a quote unquote socialized child, which was the environmentally controlled Skinner box, a crib sized container into which he put scores of children, including his own. His ultimate aim was not only to control the behavior of the isolated children, but to gain insights into how to control society as a whole. Skinner's most explicit statement of his philosophy, and ultimately one of world control, is contained in his book Walden 2, which was written in 1948. The book describes a perfect communist utopia, which is run along behaviorist lines. In Walden 2 society, it is run by Fraser, a straw man designed to dramatize Skinner's beliefs about human conditioning. Below Fraser in the pigeon pecking order are six planners, who in turn run managers who are held responsible for the controllees, and the controllees who perform the menial task of daily life. Members of the Walden 2 Society follow a puritanical code of conduct that applies to virtually every aspect of day-to-day life, including the forbidding of midnight snacks. Education is a subset of the human engineering, and children are turned over to the group by their parents. Does that sound familiar? That's what's been going on with the children of the West, especially here in the United States. So, home is no place to raise a child. That's what Drawls Fraser said. That was his philosophy, one that has seemingly been adopted by many current day shrinks and social workers. The essence of Walden 2 is the application of positive and negative reinforcement to create a smoothly running state which is free of such unwanted encumbrances as crime and choice. Skinner followed up his vision of Walden 2 in 1971. This was with his vastly hyped nonfiction book Beyond Freedom and Dignity, which was awarded the honor of being the most important book of the year by the New York Times. What is needed is more control, not less, said Skinner. It may be revelatory that throughout his life, Skinner was interested in mechanical contraptions, even working for years on a perpetual motion machine. So this is what the elites, they obsess about controlling the mass population of the world. They obsess in controlling the minds of men or the mind of man. This is the issue with these globalists. They are obsessed with, controlling everything. And that's why they're so dangerous. So he continues, his view of the composition of human beings was no less mechanical, and his vision, which characterizes his philosophies of most psychiatrists to this day. This so-called atheist, materialistic viewpoint provides a justification for the atrocities which are committed daily in the name of science. How can it be unethical to tinker with and even destroy a human being, if in fact he or she is really only a machine? With B.F. Skinner, the philosophy of psychosocial control was finely honed. Although many psychologists today insist that the behaviorist vision of the controlled world is crude and outdated, and that the docile society cannot be engineered by science, they protest too much. The behaviorist doctrine, forecasted by Hegel, invented by Wundt, and fostered by the legion of followers in science and education, is firmly in place in the halls of academia and in the offices of population shaping worldwide. and they are being applied at every level of our society. The elitists could not be happier if the whole world was placed in the Skinner box. Now, tomorrow we'll continue on the next chapter. They get into Aldous Huxley and the Tavistock Institute, and they talk about the teachers that are teaching your children. And basically, what is happening here is psychiatry and psychology is used as a weapon against the masses. It's always been about mind control, right? Even the sciences have always been about mind control, genetic control, intelligence control. I don't think any of these individuals were actually atheists. I don't think that they actually believed in their work in the sense that they believed that they didn't have a soul. That's a lie. I think they understood that there was this was a program by the ruling class and the ruling families throughout history to control, to find different ways, as many as possible, to control the world's population and reduce it at the same time by any means necessary. And that's what we're looking at. And that's their true philosophy. Remember, there's two purposes, as the New World Order of the Barbarians stated. The one purpose, the one that they show to the public, is for consumption for the commoners. And then the true agenda and the true purpose is hidden amongst the in group or the society. So their real plans are hidden from public view. And this is what this is all about. So tomorrow we'll get into the rest of this chapter and expose the truth, philosophy, and thinking of these individuals. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, hit on notification for future live streams and videos. If you want to support monetarily, you can support at the links in the description. Cash App, PayPal, Patreon, Bitcoin. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.